Good morning. I'm surprised to see this number of people this early in the morning, and I want to celebrate you guys for coming out after the party. And I also want to thank the staff and the organizers for putting that together, because it was a wonderful event, and I really, really appreciate it. So real quickly, as an intro, I also want to see if this thing works. Yes, my name's Matt Ng. I'm from Austin, Texas, so if you're dealing with the heat right now, we're going to go back soon, my wife and I, and deal with an even hotter place. So thank you. And I work for a not-so-big company, IBM, which seems to have offices in every city that I can think of, right? So anyone from IBM that made it out? Oh, it's terrible. OK. It's OK. So before I get into how we share our research, how we include people who are not researchers, designers, into our data, and how we take action from it, I want to tell you a little story. A long, long time ago, I was not a designer, I was not a researcher. My wife and I used to live in Japan, and we used to teach English. And so for 7 years, we did all the Japanese things. We took language classes, we went to Japanese inns, we dressed in robes, the baths, ate the food, and so on. We visited temples. There's more temples than people sometimes. We went to things that were very natural and just integrated with Japan. So that the bottom right-hand one is very typical of when you go to a traditional thing. That's moss, and it's very, very old. And a lot of times they put signs like, don't touch the moss. It's older than you, right? And so over the time, my wife and I got very comfortable with the culture and with the language. That's us being very confident. And that we got to be able to lead students to come to Japan. And so they trusted us with 50 US students from the United States to come to Tokyo for the summer, right? 50 souls. And so look at them, just very trusting, right? And so us as experts to lead these kids in Japan, I had to realize something. Yes, we had the experience, and yes, we had the language skills, but a lot of these kids also had studied, they also had thought about and had come with expectations for Japan. And it's not for me to kind of tell them how to experience it, but it's for me to kind of figure out, or for us to figure out, how do we guide them through this very complex world and have them, in a sense, come to their own experiences, and we can do that together. And that was something I realized as I was putting this talk together. That's something we had done before as teachers. As researchers, we should be thinking the same thing, right? There's data out there, there's work out there, people have their own opinions. How do we bring them through that as a guide? So I want to shift from Japan and kind of take you to something a little bit closer to our world today, right? So we live in a world of heroes, right? So there's probably Avengers fans out there. Are there any? Yeah? Okay, all right, so good. So you've seen the movie, and you might see it again. So the hero world, if you will, tends to focus on that one person, the one person that's going to save the world, right? And so if you think about the movie, spoiler alert, Endgame, it's really, even in the movies nowadays, that one hero is not really going to beat, in this case, Thanos with that giant glove, right? And they kind of needed a bunch of people to do it in a very complex storyline that involves time travel, right? And I realized from that movie, and then thinking back to my experience in Japan, and even thinking further, that Japan kind of figured out that world of heroes as well. But they kind of did it differently, right? So a long, long time ago, when I was a really young kid, I was a real big fan of Voltron, right? So super nerdy, right? So Voltron, if you don't know it, a bunch of lions come together, become a robot. That's the Japanese thing. So they, that's all you need to study. So they kind of knew through most of their storylines, within 30 minutes, they were here's a problem. let's try to figure out this problem one by one. And then mostly for 20 minutes of the episode, they all try to do their thing, their different styles of stuff, and they all kind of fail and screw up. And then in the last minute, they're like, oh, I think we should come together. And then they do. And then they become Voltron. Voltron becomes big. Voltron defeats the thing in the last 5 minutes, and they're like, yay, we should have done this in the beginning of an episode, but then that's not really going to be a thing, and the episodes would be really short. In tech, this is why we're all here, we actually still think in heroes, right? The late, great Steve Jobs, his book, we think of him as the sole person that created Apple, but there's actually a lot of people involved with that, Wozniak and so on and so on. Johnny Ives, I think I read recently, I think it's this week, he's leaving Apple, but he was a huge part in the design, right? Did I give that away? You didn't know that? Okay. One of the people I follow a lot is Elizabeth Gilbert, and she's a creativity expert. She's a writer for Big Magic, and her talk on TED helps us think about creativity as not that sole genius, the person stowed away in like a little dark room and then you have that idea, but it's really something that you should think about, that you're kind of teaming up with different people. You're kind of thinking of different ideas together. And so I like this example is because you're going to have a mix of skills you think you're an expert in, but even things that some people might be better at it than you, and you should be okay with it, right? And so my declaration for today is that we can all actually contribute to research. Research doesn't take too long, and it should work in some extent to an agile environment. And then researchers should be the facilitators of the data inclusion with that. And I can show you how we do it with our team. So some disclaimers. Not everyone should lead a research project. So Luki had mentioned it before, and also I think if you've done the research workshop, there are certain skills when you do a qualitative research project that helps you get the best data possible, and then helps you process it possible. But I think at the same time, people should be included in that process. And then not all research fits into a design sprint. So briefly talking about the differences there, I'm going to talk about evaluative research or testing research, and then a lot of that can fit into a design sprint and into an agile sprint as well. All right, so how we work. In my team, researchers are that green little dot right there. Designers are the blue dot. And we have developers and product managers. And so I have embedded researchers into a little squad. So I work for IBM Public Cloud and Security, and so we break up our squads into different parts of the product, right? So we have accounts and access, which is super boring, but it's really integral to what things work on. So if they don't work together, accounts and access, people tend to complain a lot, or things just don't work. So I make sure that the researchers are talking together. If one case, like this certain account, doesn't have the access it needs, what do you need to do in order to make that happen, right? And the type of work I mentioned before was we do qualitative research. So quantitative research has to do with numbers. A lot of times you can look at analytics and tracking and see sort of what people are doing, and maybe even how people are navigating through your product. But we like to look at sort of kind of like people deciding things in the moment, and then you can kind of ask or infer why they decided certain things. And so this is a picture of my niece. I'm about to test out a new soft drink that is really trendy in the United States, and I want to see kind of how she reacts to it. So raise your hand if you think she's going to like this. Nobody? No. You got one person? Thank you. Okay. All right, well, let's see. I thought that she over-dramatized that. And her response, I asked her, I was like, well, why did you respond that way? She's like, first of all, there's no sugar in this. Second of all, right, it's too spicy or too much like carbonated and whatnot. And then she's like, just get me something else, right? And so I will never feed her that again. But it's super funny how she reacted to that. A lot of our other practices are observing people or contextual inquiries into how people do stuff. Yeah, see, reacting, right? So we do like to do this, but not as creepy as this. We want to see what people are doing in the environment that they're doing it, so it just kind of removes some of the effects, if you will, of a researcher watching someone. That is super creepy. I need to change that video or picture. We also have put together labs to kind of watch people go through our products and then video record it or as much as we can. This is not a picture of our lab because it's way too clean, but it's ultimately what we're trying to get to. We want, as far as observing users working with our stuff in a controlled environment. So for a few minutes, I want to talk to you about the big experience I had as to how I got here and why I came to this story. So we had a navigation redesign. And the way I think about navigation is through basically wayfinding. So I never asked, but how many people have been to Tokyo? Nice, nice. I know someone lives in Tokyo right now. I met him on the walk. And so one scenario is that you may be working in a neighborhood in Tokyo, like near Tokyo Station, and you need to go meet some friends for hanami, if you will, or observing the cherry blossoms and drinking with some friends later in the evening, right? And so these are the stations I want to go to. So if you've been to Tokyo, you've kind of seen this map before, right? And my first time in Tokyo, my Japanese friend, she's like, well, it's not that hard. The New York subway system's a lot harder. And I was like, I disagree, right? On two levels. One, what are these lines? And then what do these words mean? And then what I found out when my first year in Japan is the room for error and the forgiveness with the Tokyo stations and Tokyo subways are actually quite harsh. If you go at the wrong time and get on the wrong train, these things will happen. You're going to be squished into a train. This guy on the right is going to happily push you into the train if you're on the right one or not, and you don't know if you're going to get out, right? And so thinking about this, knowing that I have to be somewhere, I have to figure out my own hack. How do I get from one station to the next, right? And luckily, I found an easy way, quote unquote, to do this, right? So from Tokyo Station to Yoyogi Park, where I wanted to go to, there's a line called the Yamanote line, which is a circle. And circles are the best because if you fall asleep, get screwed up or whatnot, you can go back around again, right? And you're like, oh, thank God, I'm not in some suburb. And I did that. So I went there. It took me way too long. My friends complained. I was like, hey, I'm doing this error-free. I'm trying, right? And so I did this for about 8 months as I was learning Japanese, as I was learning the city. And then around the end of the first year in Japan, I realized that there was actually a line that connected those two stations directly within 10 minutes. It's called the red line or Chuo line, if you want to go. And thinking about that, when we did the navigation redesign, we're actually doing two things. I'm going to talk about work for a second. We had a product called Bluemix, which for developers, putting things in the cloud, it helps you kind of put things together. You don't have to think about too much infrastructure, so platform as a service. We had that product, and we bought another product that was purely infrastructure. So they had their bare metal servers, their virtual machines, and so on. And they all had their own navigation. The Bluemix people had their definition for things. They had where they wanted to go and their little shortcuts from one way to another, right? And then suddenly, the company was like, well, let's do a unified experience, right? So software people also had their own navigation. They also had their own naming for things. And they also had their own shortcuts. And so we tried to well, what happens if you put them together, right? And so we did the thing as designers and as researchers, we talked to our customers. We actually had access to them and got to talk to them, did the contextual inquiries or observations and things. And we had them go through a couple of sessions. This is an open card sort where we had them put the navigation things in there, or at least the content topics, if you will. And then we had them name them. What do we call them, right? And then we also showed them a hybrid card sort, which was basically, this is what IBM is thinking. what would you do with this, or what would you name it? And so our customers, they more or less said this. They're like, I get what you're doing. These are our legacy customers. Like, you're mashing two things together, and it's pretty hard, right? And I wouldn't do that. And so when you work for a pretty big company and you still do that thing, we eventually released it. A lot of people tend to notice. So Forbes put this out as well. So the one thing that I thought about when this came out, as the release came out, it's like, we did the research. We showed them that our customers had a hard time with the navigation. We still released it. So what actually went wrong, right? Why didn't they listen to us? So the thought behind it was probably our process. So the squiggly lines I've done on purpose, right? So if you notice, like, design thinking, it's real messy and so on, right? And I simplified the process: discovery, validation, and implementation. But what we were trying to do was put our data or our work and then releasing our data in a certain spot that more or less only focused on one thing, which was design. And then seemed to block or seemed to interrupt people's thought processes across the squad. So what were our product managers thinking, what our dev people were thinking, and so on. Because our product managers were actually looking at a different piece of data. They were looking at analytics trends. They were looking at our competition. They were looking at our tickets, right? And so they already had, before and even after, their own set of opinions, right? And then, a surprise, there was another set of people, the swoop and poop people. So our leadership are also looking at another set of data, and they came in and they had their opinions already formed. And so our little bit of research wasn't even affecting the people who are making decisions, right? So what do you do with that? So if you think about that, what we did in the middle of the process, all these teams are running. We tried to insert ourselves right there. What we should do, and what we're doing now, is start at a point where, what are the things we're trying to ask together, right? And I guess in a simplified way, like, who are our users, right? But ask them across the lines. And so one of the questions I think Luki had in the follow-up was, well, how do you deal with stakeholders, right? So, like, we always talk to our stakeholders before, after, and during our projects, because they have their ideas, they have their problems. And our stakeholders tend to be like, there's a VP who's in charge of a lot of people and a big budget, and they can still get fired. So it's like, what is the thing that I can keep you in your job, right? And you ask that question. And then what is the thing that you're looking at that helps you validate some of those things, or at least the numbers you're looking at, and so on. And then the follow-up, which I'll show you at the end, right? So we do our competitive analysis, and we did one recently with marketing. We do those together. So I've noticed designers did their competitive analysis, our product managers would do their competitive analysis, and so on, even developers and so on. But this one we did with a whole other team to look at our marketing together and see how they're different across our competition, right? And so one thing that we noticed here is actually ours and our immediate competition is missing some documentation in our marketing, right? And so why is that? And what is the effect of that? So that's something we could start with and start thinking about how can we change. But also we did that in a way that we observed together, right? One of the things that helped us, especially with our developers, was doing our heuristic evaluations together of our current as-is and even the things that are going out. So people will have opinions, and they'll have opinions on what's good UX and what's bad UX. But if you use a heuristic, I'd say, principles or philosophies or vocabulary, if you will. So the idea is the same vocabulary. So what we're using here is tenets and traps, and it's from Microsoft. So it's kind of, I like this a lot, and it's kind of weird because Microsoft's our big competitors, but we use those cards because they're so damn easy to use, right? And they're pretty fun. And then everyone's kind of aligned, well, I think it's this problem because of this. And then what it does is we're looking at the same page together, and we're looking at the same cards, and we're coming to agreement as to why we think this is a problem. And we do our test preps together. So nothing like thrills me more than to show you guys a spreadsheet, right? But when people talk about A/B tests, they say, well, okay, I want to A/B test this. I needed to work out with my designers and developers and product managers, well, what does that mean? What is that flow? How you're testing it? What is the purpose? How is it different between the two? What do you think the success of these things are? And then how are we, the one at the bottom, actually, I could show you, how are you actually getting data from this, right? And so one thing we also moved away from was saying that our customers didn't like it or our customers had problems with this, but we wanted to show them numbers. One thing that really resonated with our stakeholders was the amount of people that actually completed the task versus the ones who didn't. And when you show them that number, it's a huge impact to people. And so when the results go up, all the way up to our stakeholders, and they realize, like, oh, we had 100% completion with this, but for some reason, a 50% drop in this, it kind of takes notice in that. And then we also trained people. So these are templates that we use for ourselves, but we opened them up to the rest of the teams and kind of worked with them. Because we can't do every evaluative test that people want to do, but we can definitely train designers to lead small ones. And so if you guys want templates, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I could send you some links, and they're very easy to use and so on. But kind of train them at first. They're going to write, like, just articulate what is that goal that you're using. You know, what are the questions you're trying to ask? How are you going to capture those questions? And so on, right? I mentioned before the lab, which this isn't exactly the lab, but this is something I grabbed from Google Sprints, which is once you open up your process and people do get involved, they want to get involved in everything, right? And so when we do user sessions, we split them. And we have the moderator, if you look on the left right there, with an assistant, hopefully holding a better camera than a laptop. But watching people go through the test, right? In the other room, you have the people that you want to convince or at least show them how things are working. And so this way, you're not crowding a room and sort of messing with the user, right? And they can see, like, in real time what's going on. And I put another assistant in there where they can Slack the questions into the other room. So if someone like our product manager has a question about something specific that our moderator didn't ask, they can ask that question, and then they'll get that feedback immediately. So this slide right here, or this option, is also like get help. Like, where can you get help and also show people how things are going? So this is a remote session, but I bring in people who can help note take, or how I can also note take for them. And so I'm asking questions, we're note-taking on the same thing, and more or less, I would say, giving people the access to the users as we're talking to them. And then when you're finally done, this is probably the hardest thing to convince people to do, but you open up the synthesis process for them to go through that. Yes, you collected the data, right? Yes, you may have seen the interviews together in the sessions and so on, but what are your opinions? What do you think is going on, right? So once you process that data together, what are the things that bubble up to the top as far as what you think the issues are, what do you think the priorities are, what do you think the things you should change? And so the reason why I said this takes so much time is because most of the time, depending on the size of the project and the number of people, but it's about half a day to a whole day. So how do you do that and convince them to do that? But once you do it, it's super valuable, because then you can start to see that, oh, we've all come to agreement. This is what we think the problem is. This is what we think people are saying, and so on. And when you report that back, you report back to everyone. What are your big wins? What are the things that actually work, right? A lot of times when you think evaluative tests, you talk about the top 5 problems that are screwy with your product. And this is a recent playback that I did to our stakeholders. They're like, hey, I know a lot of people worked on our search and really worked to make our search work. And throughout our tests, on our A/B tests, the news search actually performed so well that no one mentioned it, right? And as designers and researchers, you kind of want something to go out there that actually a good design, no one notices. And that was exactly what happened. No one complained, they all found what they were looking for, and it was perfect. And at the same time, you have to give them the news, right? You log the tasks, or at least the issues that we have, and you work with your product managers on what you feel is critical based off of the impact. So remember I said that the number of tasks that were completed is a good number to help people unify on what is a problem and what is not. So the top task right there, for example, is something that got in the way of people trying to give us money. So when I showed them, someone could not save a quote, and they did not move forward. And then our senior VP is like, well, we got to fix that. And I was like, yeah, you kind of do, right? And so that became the first thing, and it was ironically fixed like immediately. And one of the things we do to share, and this also takes time and it takes a lot of patience, is to get your research up on a site, get your personas up on a site, get a link that's shareable. And so every presentation you do goes back to this site, and it stays consistent. And so people know where to find it. And this is part of the personas from that site, more or less that they're up to date and they're usable for people to watch. And then you also take them down after time when they don't make sense. And so one of the few final things is, once your stuff is out there and once you present your stuff, then you track things, right? Well, how did this thing actually perform with not just, let's say, 14 users, but with, let's say, thousands of users, right? And so one of our recent releases, the top chart shows that more people are giving us feedback. That is in the blue. And then slightly better, more people are giving us positive feedback on our platform, the thumbs up or thumbs down thing, right? You guys find, everyone loves that, right? So they're just kind of giving us more thumbs up. But you also show them the whole picture. So the one at the bottom is, the green line is how many people are going to our FAQs. And then the blue line is how many people are opening up a ticket, right? So the tickets are also trending up. So that's an interesting thing that we have to ask more questions about. Like, people are sort of more favorable of our platform, but people are also, submitting tickets. So then our next thing is to look at, like, what are those tickets? What are they asking about? And one of the things is, research is bigger than your team can do. And so there's a lot of work out there that you can probably bring in that other people are doing that's relevant, if it makes sense. So the fun chart on the left is research done by an internal team that looks at the buying process. And so who is in charge of the buying process and who actually makes decisions, and then what happens. And so I use that with my team to talk about with the other teams on how do people actually make decisions when they get started with our thing. Where does that actually happen? And then the other one is from Stack Overflow, which is, well, how do people really think about your products? Which is, I'm not going to say because it's interesting, but go to Stack Overflow developer survey results 2019, and you can kind of see what people think about, like, your product, other products, what tools they use, and so on. And then how do you bring them together to give a bigger perspective of what you're actually doing? So the takeaways I have, and I love it if you kind of walk away with these as well, is, one, find out what your team's asking and what your team needs, right? And not just sort of push your agenda as far as, like, what a researcher should be doing. And so once you find out their needs, you kind of make them do it, right? But you guide them through it. So this is a picture of us doing working sessions, but none of these guys are researchers. The guy in the left is my product manager. So he's going through the process together. So people get a little pushy when you try to make them do things, but they get really happy when they start to learn things, once they get into the process, right? And finally, be the guide, right? Yes, you have your opinions. Yes, your teams have the opinions, but your brain can only encapsulate a certain amount of data. But if you do that together, you can kind of process that data together, and you have a closer alignment to what your opinions are. So that's it. I think we have some time for questions, and thank you.
Okay. So my first question is about the Tokyo subway.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you think, how would you have gone about finding out about that shortcut if you were working for the Tokyo subway? How would you go about figuring out that you were writing a circle you didn't need to?
So if I was working for the Tokyo subway system company, right?
If you're working there and you're seeing all these people go around in circles they don't need to, how would you go about figuring that out?
Yeah, so one thing I feel now is that Tokyo probably has, or at least the JR system, or all of them, is some way to track how people are going through it. They have cameras, they have cards, they can see where people are going, they can track numbers. I'm pretty sure, I'm wondering if they have the same privacy laws, but where are they going and where are they getting off, and what trains they're using. So look at that first, and then see and confirm, yes, there's some idiot going around in a circle, right? How can we help them with that? And then you find that subset of people that are doing it, right? And then you start talking to them as far as like, okay, I see you're doing this, why are you doing this, right? And so let's see if the person who's working for the Tokyo subway is interviewing someone like me, they're like, my answer would still be for security, right? So then you start thinking, well, okay, dig into that. What helps you feel more secure and so on? Why are you looking for security in this? Yeah.
And follow-up for that is obviously an underground system is really difficult to change once you find these patterns.
Yeah.
And like huge cloud infrastructure things are difficult to change once you do these things.
Right.
So when you find out that maybe some core parts of your whole infrastructure aren't doing the job that you expect them to do, how do you go about managing that?
Yeah, if your core infrastructure is not doing what it's supposed to do. So I kind of think of that subway map as kind of like your plumbing, your wiring, and all that stuff, right? So I shouldn't be doing plumbing or wiring because I'll destroy the house or kill people. But we do have access to plumbing, we do have access to wiring as a lay person. And so I don't need to know the map, I just need to know the connections. And so like I can connect my laptop to that pretty easily. I do not need to wire this whole room, right? And so when you show someone the map, it's like, right? And you don't need that, really. You really just need to think the points, right, or the trip, so.
So a question from the audience is about conducting remote unmoderated testing.
Yeah.
How do you ask questions that are clear but not leading?
So is remote unmoderated, remote moderated?
Unmoderated.
Unmoderated, questions that are not leading. So the ones we used for unmoderated tests are usertesting.com. And we base them off of tasks. So on a pure evaluative standpoint, if your tasks are get from A to B to C to D, if you're in A, we ask them, how would you get from A to B, right? And then ask them to complete that task. And then after that, we have a follow-up, which is a mini survey. It's like rating them on, how would they rate the ease of usability going from A to B, and then an open-ended question of like, is there something you feel that we're missing? Similar questions to moderated, but leave them as open and hopefully as clear as possible so they get the question, because we're not there to ask it or re-ask it. So, yeah.
What about when you or a coworker gets fixated or latches on to an idea that maybe the UX research doesn't support? How do you involve them in that process?
Yeah. One thing that we're trying, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, which is when a designer, design manager, stakeholder, whoever, wants to do the test, right? And they're always like, whoa, I just need to test it. And it's like, you're too close to this. and you have to remind them of that. And then over time, I think what we do to get them involved is yes, we're going to do an evaluative test. If I can't separate them from that test, we agree upon what is that success or that metric we're measuring, right? Easy one I mentioned before is task completion. Another great one is how does the user rate confidence or difficulty, right? So if they see an agreeable number, right, let's say 8, 7, 6, 12 people rated the difficulty very difficult, then you can show that person, hey, this is something that's really hard for people.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were over-attached or too close?
Probably, right? So one person asked me, I get this question a lot, they're like, what or do you have any biases, right? And so my mentor at work, he's like, the answer is always yes, because we're humans, right? Even we've seen in studies that algorithms have biases, so how can humans not have biases? So you say that, and then I'm more or less, I basically tell them, like, this is what I think my biases are. I get less so now. I think early on in my career, my ideas were, in a way, very precious because they represented my value. But then once you sort of realize like who the team is, kind of maybe what you can contribute, what other people contribute, then you kind of let go as an idea, as an identity. Yeah.
There's another question around tools and also like how you state problems that you're found, and you kind of mentioned 12 out of such people, but generally how do you go about doing that so that you share that understanding in a coherent way?
Yeah, so the site we have is really good. Luki also mentioned, I'm going to reference Luki a lot, is like you kind of work on how you can get clear on the results of that on the site, also on your presentations. I've noticed that numbers are really powerful if you back it up with how you got the process. And so if you're presenting to your team versus if you're presenting to your managers versus if you're presenting to your senior VPs, you want to get to, especially if you're presenting up, I present as clear as possible, this is the impact. And then you kind of have as the backup, how did you get to that impact? And this is the unspoken thing. You have sort of the right people in a room to support you, that they backed up the process as well. Because that's the thing that I think speaks a lot for your work. So
there's a couple questions about qualitative versus quantitative. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you balance those two things.
Yeah, so the easy way we balance it is like, I'm not a quantitative expert. We rely on data scientists with way more a bigger head for math. But we do quantitative light as far as tracking in our systems. We use Segment to see like what are the numbers where people are going through. We can kind of track like who are they, the types of customers that are going through certain things, where are they going, drop-offs and so on. And I often go through that with an expert because like, am I actually tracking the right thing? The qualitative stuff, the reason why we lean on that so much is because a lot of us are trained as designers, but also the people on my team have HCI backgrounds, and so they work a lot with basically people and behaviors. And so that translates into how you structure your projects, how you structure your research questions and so on in a way to kind of get the best data. So,
how do you make your user testing as realistic as possible?
Yeah, nothing beats having live code. So the last one I did, and I realized this, we actually had a live prototype with dummy data in it, and everyone that was going through it, they were like clicking on everything. And I was like, no wonder why our like InVision prototypes suck, because they always hit a dead end. So yes, you want to get to something that behaves as real as possible, and so the live code does work. One thing that we've played around with is we have a components team or a systems team that puts together React components, and then we can kind of put our prototypes together like that real easily. In a pinch, the ones we're training our designers to do, we do use InVision, and it's okay, and you kind of have to preface it if you structure the questions as clear as possible to go from task A to B. Inevitably, they're going to hit like that InVision, hey, you're not clicking on something. So, yeah.
Do you use any focus groups in your work?
Focus groups are hard, I think, because the short answer is no. I don't want to.
Why not?
Because whenever I do, I have to really study who's in the room. And I have to study who is that person that's actually the most powerful person in the room. So the last time we did it, we were at a customer conference, and the most powerful person in the room, surprise, surprise, was a customer that gave us the most money, right? And so you give that person the most room. And it's not a focus group at that point, right? And so if we were to do a focus group, we have to really manage who we allow into that room and then how we time and structure all of that. Yeah. Something
I've always found when doing user research is having that like epiphany moment with watching someone fail or succeed on your project. How do you share that moment? It's kind of a magic moment, right?
Yeah. So we always record our sessions. We always ask our customers or users, can we record it? And then at the end, we don't share the whole recording. where we make highlight reels. Because you can put together a nice, clear report. You can put together the best presentation deck. People, kind of look at their phones or they nod off and so on. But the moment we showed a video, every stakeholder, every high-level executive or whoever makes the decision put their keyboards down and they're like, that person's screwing up on our product, right? And it gets their attention like that. So
great.
Yeah.
Another question around sort of workflow. Do you get to set your own research agenda?
Yeah. So we work on research roadmaps. So we talk about ultimately what we want to get to, and then we, with our team, work with our other squads and okay, what are your immediate needs as far as the evaluative thing, and then how do we answer those immediate needs, but say this is our goal as far as our bigger research projects. So we ultimately try to do that, but we don't always get to that because of whatever changes, right? So, yeah.
Okay, and then two last questions is, what's your favorite superhero and why? And then what would your superpower be?
Oh, I always had an answer to that. What is my favorite superhero? Changes. I'd say right now I'm a big Thor fan because Thor changed in the past couple years. After Ragnarok, he was this super serious guy with blonde hair, but then Ragnarok he was wow, he's pretty funny, right? And then my superpower, I know I usually have I know it'd be a pretty useless superpower if I ever got one.
Like the bargain bin of superhero powers.
The bargain is I found the bargain. My superpower, the one that I can imagine right now and I actually have, is the ability to fall asleep in any sort of location, right? So.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it is superpower. Yeah,
I'm asleep right now.
I learned it in Japan. Asians are good at it, and you're laughing, right? And so, the moment you get us on a train or a bus, we're out, right? And so I tested it again recently. My wife and I, we slept in an airport, and I actually slept in an airport, which is that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good superpower, actually.
Yeah,
I don't think that's bad at all. Okay, everyone, thank you, Matt, very much. This is great.
Thank you very much.